Okay, moving on for our next work session, the comp plan update. We have chapters, appendices, many things to go over. So Oliver and Jose, welcome.
Good morning, Chair Marshall and councillors. For the record, Oliver Jack, and good morning, County Manager and Deputy County Manager. Councillors, this is a continuation of our work session with Council in preparation for your hearing. Again, we are coming to you with various chapters now, and this is another work session which is informational. If we can go to the next slide, please. So today we will be going over code update and review of certain comp plan chapters, and then share with you upcoming work sessions. Next slide. So in review of chapters, we have only the procedural chapter to review with you, and then we'll get into the Title 40 code update, both on housing and transportation. We review these chapters, as I've shared with Council, based on requirement to make sure that we include any new legislation that have come through, and as a fully planning county under GMA, we have to show how we are complying with new bills from the legislature. We also review the chapters just in terms of clarity, easy to read and understand, and capture correction of some previous Scrivener errors. And in some cases, we have reviewed the chapters with various advisory groups and internally with various departments. Let's go to the next slide. So today we will focus on Title 40 update, housing and transportation. We'll talk about the procedural chapter. The rest are just for your information. If you have any question on any of the appendices, just let us know. I won't go into any of the appendices. They're very self-explanatory. Ask us questions if you have any questions. There's no need me going to glossaries, all of that. And so with that, let's go to the next slide. Councillors, I'm happy to say we have Elizabeth here with us. Elizabeth is still working with us on the housing. So she will be going over the housing code updates. And after that, we'll talk briefly about the code update on Title 40. So with that, let me turn it over to Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. Good morning, County Council. Elizabeth Decker with Jet Planning, assisting on updates to Title 40, focused on residential code updates. A lot of them have to do with multifamily, but as you'll see, we have a pretty broad range of residential related updates, in part to address some of those changing legislative requirements that Oliver mentioned. So next, if you would, please. We'll just give you a brief policy background that helps inform what those updates are, go through those in some detail to give you a preview of what will be coming forward in tandem to help implement the comp plan, and then have some time for questions and discussions. All right, so next, if you would. The county has been planning for housing, as you know, for time immemorial, but more specifically since 2020, when we started with the Housing Options Study and Action Plan. And so that was adopted in 2022, and we've been working on implementation through several phases of code updates since then. Phase 1, mostly focused on middle housing code updates, was completed in March of 2024. And we have been working on the Phase 2, primarily focused around multifamily code updates, since right after that was adopted. So we started in 2024, and then we've been realigning our timeline and expanding the scope a bit to align with the other major comprehensive planning update to the 2025 plan. That has been going on for a similar time frame. So these code updates are intended to address both of those components. Next, please. So with
Question
those,
already.
Chair, yeah, I do have a quick question because I don't want to
Please.
get too deep into the weeds before. So you mentioned that the Housing Options Study and Action Plan was adopted in 2022.
correct,
When was the study conducted?
from 2020 to 2022.
Okay, so I'm sorry. The Housing Options Study and Action Plan was adopted in 2022, but the study was conducted in 2022.
Oh, it was a planning effort that took about 18 months, and so it occurred over that time frame.
Okay.
As you recall, 2020 was sort of a tumultuous year. This was actually, I was in this room, and it was my last in-person meeting to start that project right before we closed everything. So we had a bit of a slow start. So that's why.
I've not looked at the study. Can you tell me what's in the study?
Oh, yeah. It's a great, well, I definitely encourage that you take a look at it.
And I will
But
take a look at it after
Yes,
this.
but it is a study that sort of documents where the county's at in terms of what housing is available, what the needs are for housing, and then includes a large part of it. It was built on a code audit as well as economic development analysis of what's feasible to build, what the market conditions are. And then out of that, the bulk of the plan itself is a series of strategies and recommendations. And those strategies are across several different components. So code, right, is code and policy is an area that the county has the most direct control over. And so those are certainly a large percentage of the strategies, but there's additional strategies around financing and making different financial strategies to support. There's also strategies around partnerships and collaborating with other partners in the county area, like the Vancouver Housing Authority, other housing providers, as well as some legislative advocacy strategies to enact changes at the state level to enable the county.
Okay, so, and I think I heard you say that it also includes, thank you for that, that it also includes the type of housing that our community members are demanding.
There is analysis of that.
Okay,
Yes.
okay,
And
so-
I do just want to also say this work was done before the county, before the state passed the housing, what's the acronym, HAPT? Housing and Planning for All.
Housing for All planning tool.
Okay.
Yes. So the work that was done at the county level was done sort of through a different methodological framework than some of the subsequent work that's refined that. But
Okay,
yes.
so then when I look at the study later this week or next week, I'll be able to identify the amount of single family detached housing we need, multifamily housing, multi-generational housing. Does it go into that type of analysis?
That's a really good question. Jose looks like he's interested to chime in.
I think at that point in time, we were looking at the existing comp plan and the demand for the remainder of that time frame. So that would take you through 2035. When the new population was selected and the new legislation from the state that required us to plan for specific housing income bands, it's not a same comparison. So what we're planning for now as part of the comp plan update is what's reflected in that Housing for All planning tool.
Got it. Thank you. Because I know we need housing, right? I mean, that's undisputable. We've done exhaustive studies on the number of housing units that we need, 103,000, I believe, according to the comp plan. But it's important to understand what type of housing we need. I had a younger constituent send me a message earlier this week. It was a reel on cottage housing. So that kind of cluster housing, right? With a little, and they said, this is the kind of, I'm 25 years old. This is the kind of housing I want. Why don't we have more of this in Clark County if we have any at all, right? And so that specific demographic may be looking for that type of housing, right? That specific demographic may be looking for condos, which allows them to purchase their first home. And I know there's a lot of issues with housing here or condos in this state, but apartments or multi-generational housing In late 2018, I was part of a committee in the city of Hillsborough that conducted a housing needs analysis, and we were surprised that the community was much more interested in multi-generational housing than they were in single-family housing. Not that that wasn't a thing, but if we don't have this information, how do we know what we're building? We know we need 103,000 units, but what does that unit mix look like? And so my concern is if that it's not in the housing options study and action plan, and we don't have that information, then we're just building for the sake of building without having the proper type of housing that people are needing.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, you really need to read that report. We were ahead of the game before it was mandated, and actually the governor came down and gave us an award for the work that we did. So there's been some good work, and I think it's beginning to be implemented in the community. There's more work for certain that needs to be done. So
Yes, but I'll definitely take a look at the housing options study and action plan. I think it'll be very informative.
Yeah, and Counselor, I would say that there's probably more at this stage. The HOSAP probably gives you better qualitative insights into those range of housing needs and what Clark County residents are needing and finding, missing from their housing options right now. But I would look to the current work being done with the comp
Thank
plan
you.
for the latest quantitative information.
and I think we can make this allowable. That's
Mhm.
what we do. We can make this allowable, but it's the development community that has to see that there's a market to build for these different types of housing.
Yes, this is Oliver. Chair, you touched upon it. What I would say is that, and Elizabeth will agree, and my staff, I commend them. The HOSAP, when it started was, in my opinion, looking at various, different type of housing options that could be built in the future. You mentioned cottage housing. The code phase one that was completed as part of this study included cottage housing. It included triplex, fourplex, other variety of housing type. Councilor Marshall is correct that this report, I am glad that we did it because it sets the stage when the legislature passed both 11, or I think it's 1110, the ADU provision, and then the middle housing provision opens up the aperture now to allow various housing type in the single family zone that was by code prohibited before. So this, in my opinion, was really instrumental in giving us the push to begin to see various housing type now coming on the market. And I think it's reflective of the planning by all income bands. I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. And Councillor Marshall, I think that's really good framing as we get into talking about these code updates today, which is that these code updates are about creating the capacity and the opportunity for folks to come forward and choose to build under these rules. But that is the power that the county has in terms of shaping the rules for the game. All right, so next, please. All right, so as mentioned, as Oliver was saying, these code updates were adopted in 2024 and have created these opportunities, and we are seeing people choose to develop under these regulations. The code updates in 2024 really changed the opportunities in those low density zones, the R1 zones in the county that were previously primarily focused on single family detached homes. And now ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters, and a new type of smaller scale single family called compact lots are permitted under those recently adopted code updates. The county has already seen strong interest to apply those code updates and projects over the past 2 years. So 2/3 of the new subdivisions that total over 1,200 lots have used some of the provisions of this new code. So they've been pretty well utilized. The most common has been those compact lots, which are, again, the smaller scale single family on a smaller size lot than would otherwise be permitted within smaller parcels, 3 acres or smaller. So helping with some of those infill, the parcels that maybe were skipped over for development. As well as seeing some uptake in middle housing types, especially the attached townhouses have been pretty popular. So we are seeing a lot of interest in that, and that helps us set the stage for next, the multifamily plus, as I like to call them, code updates. We started with more of a focus on multifamily and affordable housing coming out of the 22 HOSAP, that housing options plan did prioritize a variety of multifamily options and set up some the strategies that I mentioned for what the work would be done for the counties, the residential and office residential, or the higher, medium, and high density zones for the county. So that we took the strategies from the HOSAP first, but because the legislature has been busy legislating and the comp plan process had kicked off by that point, we had more of a refined focus on multifamily itself in those R and OR zones. So that helped refine the HOSAP direction, in addition to some further changes from the legislature around things like parking. So all in all, what we have for this refined direction for this batch of code updates, it does still focus on phase 2 of the HOSAP strategies, but it's broader than that by prioritizing multifamily to really encourage the most efficient use of the limited, medium, and high density sites that are in the county that are zoned R and OR, including some additional land to be zoned that way with the proposed 2025 comp plan. But then we also, seeing the additional spaces and the additional need for that multifamily housing really focused on standards that would enhance the feasibility of those and the livability of those properties, so that we're not just, creating units for the purpose of units, we're creating homes. And so, yeah, that helps. So next, please. So coming up, the 2025 comprehensive plan, as mentioned, really helps us refine the direction for these code updates because that plan includes such a focus on updating the housing element. As mentioned, I know you've heard a lot of the numbers about how many units the county's trying to plan for, but the housing projections show that the county needs triple the current capacity for multifamily. So that's a huge change from what has been the primary focus for the last 20 or more years. So with the Housing for All planning tool under HB 1220, the county is looking to add capacity for an additional 26,500 homes that are affordable for households earning less than 80% AMI. So we need to create new capacity for those. And the county only currently has capacity for about 7,000. So a lot of work to do there, proposed through map and text amendments, as you'll see with these changes. The analysis with the comp plan did identify that there is sufficient capacity for single family detached as well as middle housing created through those earlier comp plan or earlier code updates in the R1 zones. And so because those earlier 2024 updates created so much additional capacity in the R1 zones, where the county's in really good shape there. And it means that with this batch of updates, we're shifting our focus to those R and OR zones to create the multifamily capacity. Next, please. And then while this is happening, the state legislature has been adding some additional legislation that helps us refine some of the HOSAP strategies. So just a few to mention, we already talked about HB 1220 that sort of helps us focus more on these different types of housing across different income bands. But there also have been significant changes to parking minimums that jurisdictions, there's sort of maximum minimums, if you will, of how much parking jurisdictions can require that have been adopted statewide. There's also been some changes to how residential uses must be permitted in commercial and mixed use contexts. That was a strategy that we looked at and adopted with the HOSAP in 2022, but this new legislation refines that in part. So part of these updates start to address this, there is an additional year. The state legislation doesn't take effect until December of 2027. So we'll come back and continue working on that, but we are headed in the right direction by implementing the HOSAP strategies. And then the last piece is there are some sort of special focus when we talk about what are the housing needs for the county, some particular housing types under STEP housing, which are emergency shelters, transitional housing, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing that help folks with particularly low incomes or other barriers to housing, as well as co-living housing that is sort of a modern dormitory, if you will, or a modern boarding house with private individual rooms sharing common facilities. And there's very specific state legislation enabling both of those housing types that needs to be implemented with this. So we've folded that in. And then we also received direction from County Council to prioritize manufactured home park stabilization. That was a HOSAP strategy included in that 2022 plan, but we had scheduled it for a later phase of work. However, conditions on the ground, challenges that are coming up can't wait. And so we got the direction that it was important to accelerate that strategy and come up with some code updates now to help residents of manufactured home parks and to work with the moratorium timeline that the county's adopted.
I have a question about the parking minimums and how is what we're doing compared to what the state legislation changes are? Because I've heard from some communities where a lot of development is occurring that there's a real difficulty because people are sort of parking all over the place. There's not enough parking spaces. And I feel like we're in an awkward stage right now because we don't have the transit resources that could encourage people to maybe get rid of their car and use other kinds of transportation methods. So I'm just wondering how we compare, or if it's worth taking another look at that. And I get that, you know, parking takes up land and we want to reduce that, but I feel like we're not quite ready for it as restrictive as maybe it has been.
Yeah, growing pains for sure,
Yep.
right? So a couple of things. Current concerns, right? Every project that folks have current concerns about were built under the county's existing standards. We have not yet implemented these state changes. And so the county, generally speaking, we'll get into this in more detail, the county's current minimums are higher than what they are proposed to be. So if there are concerns now, that's built under today's standards. And the future standards, there's very clear direction from the state about where to adjust the minimum requirements. And so the county does need to come into compliance with that is my, ask your county attorney about that, but that would be my interpretation of the state law and my recommendation for you. As far as, how that plays out, they're parking minimums. That doesn't mean folks, there's no limitation on how much parking folks can choose to build. We've definitely heard from developers that that's not of interest to them for certain projects. They know that there's a demand and that they're not going to sell their product unless they have X number of parking spaces. There's oftentimes, conditions from banks for lending about how much parking must be provided on a site. And so the county's minimums are only one part of what's going to drive the eventual parking strategy for a project. And there will be growing pains, I think, is the short answer.
Right. And would they be looking at certain areas to be more restrictive related to parking? I'm thinking of bus rapid transit corridors.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. That is where the state started. And what the HOSAP strategy was built on is that there was initial legislation a couple of years ago that talked about changing parking based on proximity to high capacity transit. And then the legislation that was just passed said, you know what, we need to accelerate this timeline. We're not going to measure it based on this. This is much more uniform and it applies to cities and counties. So much broader applicability.
Thank you.
Well, all right. I'll just add my 2 cents, but I think a lot of what we're seeing with, and what I've heard from the public, is that we've adopted standards for narrow lots, smaller streets with not a lot of on-street parking. And that's really, I think, the issue. What we require, 2 parking spots, but, and a garage. People don't use the garage. When you have visitors, it creates an issue where there's not enough. People really can't park on the street. I think we've tried to have off-street parking be part of subdivisions, but that's met some resistance from some development community with regards to that. So we're trying to create these smaller lot situations, more private roads in the urban area, which we're seeing that don't maybe allow for parking on one side of the street. So more of that is becoming part of the urban fabric. And so that's a challenge that I don't think we have really any good solution to. And I don't think these reduction in minimums are really going to affect that. But it's just that the interface between the road and the development sites. And because these things are so close together, there just doesn't leave a lot of room for on-street parking.
Thanks.
I
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Young.
Just a quick comment on parking. We can develop minimums or maximums or, have no requirement for parking. I think it's important to note that the market does have some level of demand for parking. But we can, with our code, we can create situations where even though parking is allowed, it won't actually or can't actually be built, just based on the level of density requirements that we have and other restrictions. It just, when you start having smaller and smaller lot sizes and more density required, it becomes trickier and trickier to find a place to park. And in multifamily, you get to a point where you essentially need underground parking or parking structure, which is absolutely cost prohibitive. So, there's the code part of how we impact parking directly, but there's also the zoning code that has nothing to do with parking, which will still impact parking.
Chair.
Go ahead.
We get a lot of emails, or at least I do, from constituents who complain about not enough parking, particularly in planned unit developments, those big developments in unincorporated Clark County that don't have easy access to public transportation. And Jose made a point earlier about people not using their garages. It's because they're not building them big enough. I mean, the average American car is the size of a bus in most countries, right? And so these parking of these garages are really tiny. I live in one of those townhouses. I can't squeeze my little Crosstrek in it because I won't be able to get out of my car. And so I use the garage for something else. For yoga. No, I'm just kidding. I don't practice yoga. But the point is that we're not, these planned unit developments are being built with very narrow roads. They don't have access to public transportation. And there just isn't enough parking. And what's happening is if people are parking along the roads, making it impossible for first responders sometimes to be able to get from one point to another because there just isn't enough space. So I don't know what the solution is in a city or in a county that is so low density and we have to meet certain requirements because it's kind of that chicken and egg situation, right, that we're in. Not enough access to public transportation or being able to get around. But we're so car dependent. So I hope that staff can maybe figure that out for us.
I think we need to work with CTRAN on this one.
Yes, you do.
Okay. Any other questions at this moment? I think we're ready to go on.
All right. Well, let me give you an overview of what code updates are proposed. And I think you've provided some rich context of how these are going to affect and interact with other parts of regulations that we maybe we'll do some additional follow-up work on. So we've got 9 areas to talk about today that we sort of grouped the code concepts in rather than reading you, verbatim hundreds of pages of code. So next, please. You're welcome. So first part to set the framework, set the context for all these code updates is that The first piece for these residential and office residential zones is really to simplify the zoning framework. So one of the things identified in the audit with the HOSAP, as well as we're moving forward with the 2025 comp plan, is that there's just too many zones. There's 5 zones, and there's a difference without distinction, in the sense that there are very slight gradations between some of the zones, and there's a real opportunity we saw to consolidate them, in part because the middle housing updates to the R1 zones really take over a lot of the work that the urban medium zones were previously doing. So everything in the R18 and the R12 zone currently is now permitted in the R1 zones. So those really don't need to be distinct zones anymore. And so moving forward with the urban medium, the proposal is to consolidate them, that the current R12 would get a boost up to what we're proposing as the R24 zone. So an increase in density there, so to sort of pick up where the R1 zones leave off, rather than having overlap, or even having a scenario where urban medium permits less density than what's permitted in the R1 zones. And then the 2 other urban medium zones can be consolidated into a new R36 zone. And then for the urban high, there's currently 2 zones. There's not a lot of distinction in terms of the uses. There's a slight scale distinction, but when we look at the type of housing that the county needs in creating this capacity, we really need that capacity for all of these urban high zones. And so we're proposing a single R50 zone for that.
Can you explain briefly what that is for those that are listening? The R50, just what it means.
Yeah, sure. So the R's and the OR zones, the number after it, the 50 in this case, is the maximum density that's permitted.
And that's per acre.
Per net acre. Yeah. All right. So thank you. And so across those 3 new zones, the biggest change, is to focus the permitted uses on multifamily. Currently, these zones, particularly the urban medium zones, allow a wide variety from single family detached up to multifamily. And what the county has seen in the past 20 years is that there's been a lot of interest in not multifamily. So there's been a lot of interest in smaller single family detached, a lot of townhouses in those urban medium zones, even townhouses in the urban high. And given, what's being proposed as R50, and given the limited supply that the county has and the need to triple capacity for multifamily, we're really seeing that these zones need to be focused on multifamily, particularly also in the context of these changes to R1 zones that were passed in 2024 that now create that same capacity for townhouses, smaller single family detached, and other middle housing across the much broader supply of R1 low density properties in the county. So we really, with these zones, we now see the opportunity and the need to focus on permitting multifamily in these 3 zones. The distinction is the R24 zone, because that is a bit of a transition zone as taking over from the current R12 zone. It's most likely to be zoned in the periphery around existing R1 zones, some of those neighborhoods. And so we wanted to add a little flexibility there for triplexes and quadplexes as more of a transitional use. So next.
I have a question.
Please.
How many stories? Can we go up more?
Good pop quiz. I believe the current height limit is 50 feet in all of those zones, and we're not proposing to change that.
And is that 3 stories, or how many stories is 50 feet?
3 or 4.
5.
I think assuming 12 feet per story before
4.
you could get down to.
Yeah.
And that would require an elevator, correct? If it's 4, anything over 3?
I think typically, I know that there have been some recent changes that allow for stairs in some of the, I'm not sure what the threshold is, but I know that there have been some
I
recent
think
changes.
the threshold is the ability to walk that many stories.
And to get people to buy, rent the units in the upper stories and walk up. Yes, typically we see up to 3 with stairs and over that with elevators.
Right, but nothing over 4 stories.
This is Sullivan, not in the unincorporated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can get up to 6 or more inside the city limits of Vancouver
Got
for
it.
now. Yes.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
So I know that the pictures aren't always a 1-for-1, but I noticed in this particular picture that it does not appear that there is any parking. So I'm curious, is it anticipated that there will be no parking in these?
Thank you for the question. I would say that was not the driving consideration in these illustrations. I would, let me polish off my crystal ball. I would expect that most multifamily going forward, this personal opinion going out on a limb, will continue to provide off-street parking. The county has not seen any projects with, seeking zero parking historically.
The parking's in the back. In
Yeah,
this
let's
illustration, we
imagine.
just can't see it.
Yeah,
It sits back
yeah.
there.
Yeah, excellent site design. Okay, so when we talk up, let's see, where are we? Could we go on slide number 2?
Number 219.
Yeah, slide 19. Thank you. Okay, so when we talk about these zones, we're changing the names, we're consolidating and we're changing the names for, as we alluded to, for a purpose, which is the R24 zone is now proposed to be a range of 18 to 24 units per acre. Right, that's where the 24 comes from the maximum. For the R36, we're looking at a range of 24 to 36, and R50 is proposing a 40 to 50 unit acre range. And so that's a significant change from the current standards, in particular, increasing those minimum densities. Right now, the minimum densities in R12 are as low as 8 units per acre. And when we're looking at tripling multifamily capacity, that math ain't mathin', as the kids say these days. If you get to talk about reals, I get to. Yes, so that's some significant changes. We have heard concerns about what that means because a lot of the existing products and developments that have been built in those urban medium zones would not meet the proposed minimum densities. And so the direction is really that this capacity is needed. The county residents, there is significant need for housing. And so this is really a call to say on these limited lands, this is the type of projects that are needed. There are developments that have been proposed in the county. A lot of the multifamily that has been proposed can meet these minimum densities. They just haven't been chosen for every property or, for very many properties. So there are opportunities. Development that is occurring here can fit within these density ranges. It'll just be a different mix of housing than we've seen in urban medium and urban high. And also to point out, as I mentioned a few times here, we've calibrated these density ranges to pick up where the R1 zones leave off. So the R1 zones with the middle housing, those low density zones, now provide up to 21 units per acre. And so that's why these zones pick up where they do. We've also, as part of some feedback that we've gotten about these ranges and concerns, a few, things that we didn't bullet point to keep the slide a little cleaner was just that we've added some clarity about how developable area is measured for those minimum density calculations. We anticipate there'll be, just a need for clarity about how that's measured and to make it easier to understand what the requirements are for both applicants and for the county to administer. And then we also, as I mentioned, triplexes and quadplexes are permitted in the R24 zone. And we got some good feedback about those might be permitted, but if we have to meet this minimum density, it might not actually be feasible to build on some of these smaller existing lots that are already in the county. And it would be a shame, to pass those over completely, that building a 5 or 6 unit apartment complex just isn't going to work very well on a small apartment site. The sort of mechanisms and scale aren't working. But if a triplex or quadplex was permitted, was effectively prohibited under the minimum density, that could just create a lot of concerns for those smaller lots. And so we did propose an exception in the draft code for small lots under 20,000 square feet that would not have to meet the minimum density, so that there's a little bit more flexibility. So
And these zones are spread out across the entire unincorporated part of the county, correct?
Correct.
Unincorporated urban part of the county. Okay.
Yeah, within the within the urban growth areas, primarily the Vancouver
UGA.
urban UGA.
Thank you.
Chair,
Go ahead.
sorry to drag this back to parking again, but I think this is an important issue. I know that we receive a lot of feedback about parking or, the lack of parking essentially and how that changes neighborhoods. What I'm wondering is what level of analysis have we done with the levels of density that we're requiring to see if any off-street parking is feasible to be provided or not?
So we've not done a detailed analysis of all of the parcels available. We are looking at our existing urban medium zones that already should have accounted for that. I'm not sure what your expectations would be for us to do a site design on how many of the existing acres to see if development could occur. I mean,
Well,
there's
I don't
the
know the
opportunity
answer
to,
to your,
I mean, there's the opportunity to consolidate lots, to have multiple properties. It's really kind of dependent on what the development is going to be. There's multiple ways of structuring these.
so I don't know what the answer would be to this, but I don't know, if if you could go to, I guess Deeb would be the first thing that comes to my mind about different scenarios, because I know that different sizes of lots are going to have a significant amount of change and more adaptability, like the larger the lot and such. But I mean, how can we go and say, and kind of pick a few different scenarios in terms of lot sizes and really go in and find out, okay, with this in mind and with the required minimum density here, what are we going to see? What is the market going to provide or not provide in terms of off-street parking? Is that possible?
Do you mind if I say something really quick?
Oh, no, jump in.
April Firth, Deputy County Manager. I think that the parking issue is a tough issue. I understand, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the state is going even less. Their goal is to require less parking, which means then we have to adopt that less parking. And then to double down on that for a developer who right now has their internal roads are private roads, which we can't regulate on, and also are smaller. If they were to make them public roads, which makes those roads bigger, that then creates cost issues as far as affordability. So I think that issue gets compounded. I don't know what the solution is. I wish I did, but you have the state saying we need to require less parking, and then you also have, in order to give parking, that makes the units less affordable because the developer then gives that cost. They pass that
Right,
cost on.
I get that, and there's a push and pull and there's a balance, but what I'm curious about, so for example, with multifamily housing like this, in like 3-story high, the only feasible option without really high rent, which we really won't see anywhere in the unincorporated area, in the urban growth area, it's cost prohibitive to build any kind of structured. So the only parking that you will see on, off street is on the ground, land, just land for parking. So at some point, at some level of density, that becomes, minimum density requirement, that becomes not even possible to do. I mean, you have to use the entirety of the lot essentially to provide that housing. So that's kind of what I'm curious about is these different levels of density, the different new zones that are being proposed, which ones are feasible that a project could possibly have parking and which ones really just aren't, because the only possible outcome would be like structured parking, which is not financially feasible.
So a couple of things. So in order to, that would be very difficult to evaluate all of the properties. What I would say is that the developments that we have seen that already are being built in the county that meet this density are being built as you described. And so we would anticipate that that would continue. The issues we've had with parking are primarily, as I stated previously, with smaller single-family lots on these narrow roads where there isn't on-street parking. I don't know of any complaints that we've gotten from off-street parking from apartment structures.
Okay, so you're saying that what we're seeing come out of this right now is no parking off street?
No, not.
No,
I don't
the
know if I
off-street
understood that
parking is
comment.
going to be on site,
Yeah.
like they're being developed currently.
Okay, so
But-
currently we're seeing these densities being built with off-street parking.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Perhaps I could be sent some examples later. That'd be interesting for me to see.
Well, so the interesting thing is that at the same density, you can do it two different ways. You can have a small single-family subdivision with no on-street parking and very small lots, or you can have apartment complex with parking included within the site. And that's really the distinction. And what I'm saying is that we are not seeing any complaints about the apartment buildings with the on-site parking. It's the other that we're trying to move away from in these zones that have been really the cause of the problem for the lack of parking.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the comments, and if you could send me examples, that would be great to see.
There was a nod that that will occur.
Yes, thank you. All right, if we could look at the next one, please. So our next strategy, gosh, I guess my numbering, no, we're on 3. Our next strategy is we're also looking at our mixed use zone to add some additional capacity as the county is working on tripling. As mentioned, this comes out of the HOSAP, but the state is also pointing in this direction to add more residential in these contexts. So these code updates do sort of a first phase of that by refining the housing mix that's permitted in the mixed use zone. So again, since we're trying to get this more multifamily capacity, proposing to remove single family detached and townhouse uses in, sort of those more vibrant mixed use contexts, while continuing to permit a mix of multifamily, duplex, triplex, quadplex, and cottage housing there. And then for those housing types, allowing the residential component of a mixed-use development to increase from 80% up to 90%. So that gives us some additional capacity and also responds to what we're hearing in terms of market demand and interest from developers. That means that we're shifting to a 10% non-residential component, but that would not be required for any affordable housing under this new Senate Bill 6026. So those projects would be exempt from the non-residential component. And then the other change proposed for the mixed use zone is to expand the density range so that it more closely aligns with the residential zones. There will be some further work that we need to do over the course of 2027 to implement 6026 because it allows complete waiver of any non-residential component in commercial and mixed use zones for a portion of the county's lands. But we haven't, that hasn't been part of the work so far to identify what the priority areas are. And we want to make sure that we have a thoughtful conversation about that in the time that we're allotted. So we have some additional time after this project, and you will see further changes in the mixed use and the commercial zones to come. Next, please. As mentioned, since we're greatly shifting the focus to multifamily developments, we want to make sure that those multifamily developments are livable places for county residents. And so one of the key changes that we spent a lot of time working on, with several site plan examples, a lot of discussion with developers, and really good feedback about what this would mean in terms of on-site development, is enhancing the quality of the multifamily amenity areas. So recreation, garden, active spaces on a site. It could be a play structure as is pictured in this illustration, but it could also be something like a community garden space or a shared patio or a picnicking area. And so when we looked at this, we wanted to zoom out and sort of understand both the current landscaping, setback, and amenity area standards. And right now, those three can sort of overlap in some ways that can be difficult to understand. And so our first goal was to just clarify what those three categories are, what counts in each of those three categories, and where there is permitted overlap and where there is a requirement for them to be separate. And that's to help both applicants as well as county staff to implement the future code. And we heard a lot of interest in just making it clear so that everyone knows what to expect. And so with these new clear requirements, the recommendation is to move from, right now there's a 20% overall site landscaping requirement, as well as about 200 to 300 square feet of recreation space or amenity space that's required per unit. And so overall, that's going to be more than 20%, but also similar to the parking, as densities go up, if it's a square footage per unit, that means that the square footage is going up, and then can sort of squeeze out what the allowable density is. So we identified that in the HOSAP code audit as a potential constraint on higher density development that really didn't provide additional, quality of life. Just additional square footage isn't the answer. And so the proposal is instead to move to a flat percentage of the site area, regardless of density or number of units. So breaking out that 20% landscaping and moving towards 15% overall site landscaping and 5% amenity areas that are measured separately, so that it's clear that we're getting both landscaping and distinct amenity areas. But that the overall area doesn't increase and in fact decreases because there's no longer the additional square footage per unit for recreation space. So, and within those amenity areas, there's additional standards that focus on the quality of those spaces, requiring a range of improvements. So we've listed things, as I mentioned, common, obviously play structures, but benches, seating, ornamental gardens, community gardens, recreation facilities, sport courts, ball fields, as well as we had a lot of discussion about whether pet spaces, pet exercise areas should count as amenities. We know that a lot of county residents love their pets and are looking for a place to exercise them. And we have seen some not very high quality spaces proposed in some recent developments. It's really just sort of an isolated corner of bark chips. And we're looking for more. We think county residents deserve more in terms of amenity spaces. And so we added some additional standards about improving pet areas with fencing and surfacing, amenities like trash cans to take care of those delightful gifts our pets leave behind. So really just trying to add some more clarity and specifics about how these areas have to be improved to make them as livable as possible if they're going to be required. There's also flexibility to meet this 5% requirement through private outdoor areas. So if there are balconies or decks, or even, if someone wanted to be splashy and add a rooftop garden, those could all count, as well as indoor spaces. If there's, again, something like an indoor sauna or other community rooms or a game room, something like that, all of those would count towards the 5% requirement. And then finally, because we've added such specifics.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Just a quick question. All these good things, does it force the community to have a HOA in a sense? By having these.
We would expect, right. Most of these are not condos. We'd expect most of these to have a property management company because they're rentals. And also to say they don't have to be these indoor spaces. They are, just like the current landscaping, they could be outdoor spaces.
Yeah. I was just thinking, it's a good thing. I was just thinking, practically speaking, it might increase the cost for folks.
And that's why we tried to create a range of options that could be managed by a property management company. But because we've added all these, additional specifics to try to drive at this quality, we also didn't want to limit folks' thinking. So the proposed code also adds a flexibility for an alternative design to be proposed, equal or similar quality.
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
quick question. So if we could go back to the last slide real quick. This was one of the first issues that came to us when three of us joined the council. And what I'm curious about is, have we looked like holistically at this as to whether or not this is going to provide the type of benefit that the community needs? And what I mean by that is, that we've kind of picked these percentages of space that we want to have, but like, I know, for example, and I'm not suggesting we do this, but I'm just saying that there are other ways to accomplish the open space and recreational area needs for community. Like, for example, Camas, they require basically, I think if I remember correctly, like 25% of the parcel be essentially given to the city for parks purposes. And so kind of what I'm wondering is this the way to go? Or would it be more like, not requiring this in these areas, but requiring like a, larger park impact fee or something in lieu of that, and creating public spaces that people can use? I mean, what is more efficient with land use? What is more effective at accomplishing the goals that we have behind the green space in the recreational area? Have we looked at that a little bit more broadly?
Our focus has really been on-site areas, sort of given the geography of the county and the distribution of these spaces, because they're not always next to, existing or potential park facilities. So we're really focused on providing smaller spaces that are immediately accessible for residents through this standard.
Okay, I take your word for it at this point, but I would be interested in hearing to what level we have considered that, and whether it was just ruled out right away or just kind of we were, I mean, some of this is being driven just by time constraint, obviously, but and maybe that's a later conversation that we have down the road, especially considering the updates and the increased funding that we're looking at asking the voters to approve for parks in our county. So yeah, thank you.
And I think maybe going forward, I know when we were looking at some of the upzoning in the 179th Street area, we realized that there was some regional parks and some large parks in close proximity to that. And so there may be something where we can provide some sort of exemption if there's developments in close proximity. But I think that's sort of as far as we got with trying to leverage existing park facilities.
Okay, I think that is a good direction to go, because I mean, ultimately it's about livability and mental health achievements in our community. And I hate to require land to be used for it when it's duplicating something that's already like adjacent to the property. And yeah, I just am looking at this fundamentally, what are the overall needs, and how can we accomplish that in the most efficient way possible? And I'm not suggesting that the other route is the way to go for sure by any means, but I think it should be explored whether that can be done more efficiently and end up with more efficient use of our land.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I've wondered that myself, whether or not there are other options that could be, it may be the exception where there's a situation where you could have additional land in proximity where a park could be developed. I know on 179th, I think, well, there's Whipple Creek where on one side there's the Fairgrounds Park. These are large areas on the west side. On the east side, you've got Cozy Camp and then nothing. So I think that's an area where a lot of housing is going in, but it's totally car dependent. So, well, we'll hear more about all of those issues, but I do wonder if there could be some scenario where something creative could be worked out so it would augment funding for our parks department and provide for little pocket park or something that could be more maybe more useful than something on site. So I don't know the exact solution to that. But while we're on this, I was looking at your memo from July 15th, which provided an overview. And on page 4, we're talking about revising these standards. And an example was given that would take it about that amenity area, take it from 12,200 square feet, which is what it would be under the current rules, down to 4,175 square feet, which is a significant reduction, which I don't see really portrayed in the presentation. So I'm wondering about if this is a significant reduction that would be in what is being proposed.
Yeah, thank you. I can speak to that example and sort of what the envisioned outcomes are here, and I think it ties in nicely with this discussion you're having about what the most efficient ways are to meet residential amenities on site. And what we have been seeing, and we had several examples provided both by developers as well as by community development staff of things that they're seeing, is that yes, the current requirement is higher in terms of overall square footage, but that leads to, shall we say, some perverse incentives to try to provide some lower quality spaces. I don't think that there's ill intent. I just think that there's just a challenge to fit it into the site, and so there's different ways that right now that 12,000 square feet can overlap with some of the landscaping areas. And so it's easier, obviously, if you can use the same piece of land to meet the requirement twice. So you're not necessarily getting overall more space. You're just getting places that are getting double counted. You're also seeing amenity areas. We had several examples where, some of the proposed recreation area is these sort of isolated strips or corners of the site that, are being proposed again as, fields of bark chips for, that are pet exercise areas. So I think that the idea was, rather than push the quantity, that by the compromise is, let's reduce the quantity, but be very clear that it doesn't overlap with landscaping so that there isn't that same incentive. And the quality really has to be improved so that it is usable and it is meeting residents' immediate on-site needs. So for things like a balcony off of your immediate unit, a patio that comes straight out of your unit, a small play area where your children can play that you can visually supervise them while you're making dinner, which is not the same as having access to a public park within a half mile, which is a fantastic family outing, but is a lot different than just, telling the kids to go outside and play for a little bit. A place where you can walk the dog, immediately on site rather than put your pet in the car and go to the park.
I don't know how we assure that there'll be quality spaces in any scenario.
that is definitely a
Sure.
challenge we've run into, and we're
We're trying.
trying to write the best code that we can to encourage those outcomes.
Thank you. Councillor Young?
Yeah, just one last comment along these lines. And really, this is what my thought process is I recall during this conversation, I went to several different developments and looked at what I was seeing. And essentially what I'm seeing is, you know, this little triangle of land that didn't fit for anything in the overarching plan has grass on it and a sign that says you can walk your dog here. And I don't think that that serves well, I mean, don't get me wrong, that is helpful. That is helpful, but I don't know that it serves our overarching goals that we have for the community and for livability and for, you know, mental health and making sure that people have access to greenery and, you know, the positive things that are needed to create a good, healthy community. And so you know, the focus should be really so much on what is our goal and how do we get there. And I just want to make sure that we are not just arbitrarily reducing the number of units that can be built without a significant community, you know, positive thing that we're receiving. That's just my comments on it. I think over time we need to do a little bit more work on this.
Okay, thank you. I think any other comments from our panel? Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
Yep.
All right, it's the topic you've all been waiting for. Let's keep talking about parking. So the direction in these proposed code updates is to come into compliance with the state's requirements that are recently adopted by revising the parking minimums. And those look like 1 space per unit for single family homes, half a space per unit for multifamily, and then no minimums for any dwelling units under 1,200 square feet. So I would anticipate that's going to pick up a lot of the multifamily homes, or for affordable housing or senior housing. So that's on the residential side. And then on the commercial side, you know, this is mostly a residential project, but we figured let's just do all the state compliance for parking while we're at it, while we have that code section open. So then we're looking at 1 space per 500 square feet for commercial uses. There are some additional exceptions there. I'd say about half, when I was updating the county's parking standards, about half of the commercial requirements that are already in the code already meet this standard. And then the other half were adjusted to meet. So again, these are the off-street parking minimums. And I think a lot of the conversations you've had already have picked up on some of the distinctions there, that if this is what can be required off street, that also really does increase the focus, you know, outside of this project as you go forward, to think about what the on-street opportunities are and think about what the street designs are and, you know, how much on-street parking should be required. And there's a real push and pull there. Has been mentioned that, you know, there's an interest to have narrower streets for cost efficiency and stormwater. But if they have fewer on-street parking opportunities, we may need to look at, or, you know, there may be a broader conversation about the values there. And again, you know, minimums is another important word here. These are not, you know, intended to say this is the right number of parking and this is what everyone should build. You know, certainly there's oftentimes a fear that if it's a minimum, that nobody's going to provide more than the minimum, right? That's just sort of what we've been talking about with open space. But we certainly have seen more interest in providing parking that exceeds the minimums for a lot of multifamily residential projects. So this is the territory we're all walking into. And I think that, you know, you have good colleagues across the county that are working on the same issue as well as across the state. So continue to see some growing pains and refinement as that moves forward. But code will bring you into compliance with the state requirements.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Just one comment on this, and it kind of ties together both of the previous conversations we've been having about parking and about, you know, overarching strategy, because this is one of those things that, you know, we're talking about creating zones that are going to push the cars. You know, we're trying to increase density, right? That's our ultimate goal. And we're creating zones that may be pushing that parking out onto the street. And now if we're looking at like adopting different road standards that accommodate those cars, well, you know, creating larger roads consumes more land, you know, and so you start getting to a point where your good intention turns bad. You know, like, yes, we're creating more density on the land that's developable, but less land is developable now because we have wider road standards, because we're trying to accommodate the cars parking on street that aren't parking off street. And the reason they're not parking off street is because our development code really makes it to where it's unfeasible for that parking to be built on site. So they all tie together, and I don't know how we figure out that balance and how we make this all work, but it's tough. It's a challenge.
Keep walking at it.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Our next topic is was the topic of our previous work session a few weeks ago that I attended to talk to you about manufactured home parks. And so based on your direction from July 1st, as well as, you know, work we've been doing more broadly, the proposed code updates do include a new manufactured home park overlay zone that would apply to existing and new manufactured home parks within the urban growth boundaries. That's primarily the Vancouver UGA. And this new overlay only permits manufactured home parks and has a use exception option where an applicant can demonstrate that the park is no longer viable and apply to remove that overlay and redevelop as something else. But the intent of the manufactured home park overlay is to preserve existing parks for as long as they are viable by limiting other redevelopment opportunities. The other piece in the code updates that addresses and supports manufactured home parks is adjusting development standards for those parks, simplifying some of the standards in terms of many of the topics we've already mentioned, things like open space and some of the setbacks and spacing requirements to make them clearer and more in line with what's required for other housing types in the same zones. And then adding a clearer process for replacement and addition of additional new manufactured homes within those parks, so that supports the ongoing viability and sort of, you know, of natural evolution of these parks. Rather, the intent is not to freeze them in place, but to keep the parks, and as an individual home may age out, that to make it a lot easier to swap that out for a newer home and continue to make these good places for county residents to live. We are continuing to refine the approach. You know, as you recall, one of the big questions from our earlier work session was about whether or not to permit other housing types outright if they're developed with affordable housing restrictions within a manufactured home park, because we'd seen some interest in those hybrid models, primarily from Habitat for Humanity. And so thinking about what's the right amount of flexibility for that and how widespread might that interest be, you know, does it merit us, you know, an approach one way or the other in the code? So there's some detail in the memo about that, and we'll be looking for some refinement on that. As proposed, the draft code would still require that use exception if a site is to be redeveloped as affordable housing, but proposing affordable housing would be a qualifying criteria for that use exception to rezone it. So we wanted to make that very explicitly clear. The alternative would be to permit the housing outright without requiring the rezone. But we just felt that it was more useful to have that review process and intentionality behind it. So that's what you see in the draft, and we're open to feedback on that. Any questions before we move to the next?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you for doing this. One of the things that I want to make sure didn't get lost, and you may have said it, but I wasn't quite sure about that, but it's not necessarily just about looking for an allowance for, you know, redevelopment if there is affordable housing required, but also part of the exception option that any new development is required to be affordable to some degree. So that it gives a level of disincentive for redevelopment and incentivizes it's maintaining its existing affordability as it is without redevelopment.
Thank you. That is, I want to clarify that is, there would be options to redevelop under the proposed code that would not require that ongoing affordability if an applicant met the criteria for the proposed use exception. And I would encourage that we have a further conversation with the county attorney about any additional limitations that could be placed on that.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Let's do that because I think that's an important piece of this. The goal is to disincentivize because, the rent cap law has incentivized redevelopment. And so the goal for me on this is to disincentivize that redevelopment to maintain the existing affordable housing that we have. So definitely let's talk to legal if we need to and see what we can do there, because I really hope to see that in the event that we do approve an exception for redevelopment, that there are significant restrictions on what that looks like and required affordability components to it.
Thank you. All right, next, please. Okay, next piece, just a few more to wrap up here, is that we wanted to look at the Highway 99 sub area. This was one of the HOSAP strategies. The overlay zone in the Highway 99 sub area creates additional residential sub areas and or overlay districts, I believe they call them, and additional development standards. It's almost 20 years old. And so some of the things that were anticipated in the Highway 99 sub-area plan were innovative for their time. And now the county's code is really caught up with a lot of them. So for example, allowing middle housing, that was something that was very innovative when that overlay was adopted. And there's a mixed residential area within the plan, that talks about mixing those housing types. And now that's permitted outright in all of the R1 zones. And so we just wanted to catch up through a very surgical updates to the Highway 99 overlay code to catch it up with the changes that the county has made in the R1 zone, by allowing all middle housing types in the mixed residential and the single family residential overlays. And then within the multifamily overlay, really aligning that with the changes that you've heard me talk about today that are proposed for the residential and office residential zones, so that the focus is on multifamily uses. So changes there. And then also for middle housing types, again, when this was adopted, that was an entirely new thing. There were no standards in the county code. Now the county has adopted standards for middle housing. And so removing the specific standards for middle housing in Highway 99 and instead pointing to the new county code so that there's more uniformity and easier to implement. So those are the changes you see in that plan.
Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. This is an area that I'm very, very interested in this council taking up and discussing in the near future once the comprehensive plan is completed. We know that staff has limited capacity, and so I hope to, have a work session right in front of council in a few months that allows us to provide an update, allows the staff to provide an update on the sub-area plan. In addition, the current sub-area plan extends a couple miles east. I think that something to consider in the near future is reducing how far it extends east and focusing solely on that quarter of a mile or half a mile east and west of Highway 99, so that we can really narrow down the plan and improve, now that the BRT will be extending north on Highway 99, we can start, talking about multifamily housing, transit-oriented development, but really focusing on that area instead of those neighborhoods a couple of miles east of the corridor.
It would be really looking at that transit-oriented development along that stretch.
Right, but as you can see, the sub-area plan extends all the way to here, which is pretty significantly far from transit.
Well, unless there's cross plans that CTRAN might have in the future.
I don't see that that improving anytime soon.
All right, thank you. Next, please. The next strategy or next component of the code updates is to permit those step housing and co-living housing options that I mentioned at the top. And so these are specific housing types with legislative direction about where to permit these. And so the proposed code updates bring you into compliance with the state requirements on this and really expand sort of these special purpose housing types that are needed across the county. So that includes transitional housing and permanent supportive housing are proposed to be permitted in all residential, commercial, and mixed use zones. However, they can be regulated according to all the same standards that apply to other residential and other development in that zone. So that doesn't mean, for example, that this gives someone, carte blanche to put 100-unit apartment or, permanent supportive housing building into a low density residential neighborhood. They still have to meet the same, lot sizes and setbacks and height requirements as those zones. But at that scale, inside the building, these other uses would be permitted. Transitional housing and permanent supportive housing are going to look a lot like apartments. That's basically what they are. They're just targeted for specific populations and may have some supportive services on site as well.
I'm just wondering how many units we might be looking at with these, or will that just vary?
I would expect it to vary. I don't have any information specifically.
Thanks.
But you mentioned that this type of housing, it's only targeted towards specific populations, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, and of course, as the cost of living and the cost of housing continues to increase, in the future, we might just need this type of housing for, people that just can't afford an $1,800 a month rent. These are very common in Japanese cities, for example, and European cities, these kind of dorm style type of housing. So, at this point, it seems like it is pretty specific who it's targeted towards, but
Oh, yeah. And let me offer a clarification that sort of more dorm style and what you see pictured here, that's co-living housing. Transitional housing and permanent supportive housing would not necessarily be co-living. They're distinct categories.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Transitional housing and permanent supportive housing could look more like apartments. They just have additional financial support.
I see. Okay. And then, so what you're seeing here in that image is co-living.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
perfect. It still, I think it's something that would probably need a lot more of in the future for folks that just can't afford, high rents and high mortgages.
And this replaces boarding houses. I don't think we see boarding houses anymore, but I think it fills that role.
Yeah, I'll go out on a limb and say that the county hasn't seen a boarding house application in, the last 20, 40, 50 years.
Well, hopefully we'll see some co-living applications.
Yeah, right. I think there's both, financial as well as community aspects that folks might be, as you mentioned, folks looking for this, hungry for this kind of living.
Co-living, really quick. Co-living is not targeted to specific populations like transitional housing and permanent support housing is, correct?
Correct. Co-living comes with no affordability limitations
Thank you.
Thanks.
Chair,
Go ahead.
quick comment on this one. I was actually surprised by a comment that I heard at one point from Shabana McEwen. Specifically, I think it was when the city was considering looking at adopting this, and that comment really struck me in the sense that, I agree with us moving towards this opportunity, but I want to be very careful. What I want to see this being is an opportunity for people to have a lower amount of rent that they need to pay, but that it still fits their needs. Not that families and stuff end up going into these situations because that's the only thing that they can afford. I see this as an opportunity for young people, maybe kids in college and stuff, where they don't need their own common space. They don't need a full kitchen. They can share a bathroom and things like that. But when we introduce this, how do we ensure that it remains a positive living environment and doesn't become something that, too many people are, we have large families moving into it because that's the only thing they can afford. And maybe the landlord doesn't take care of things responsibly. I mean, how do we how do we alleviate some of the concerns that come with this style of housing while still allowing it and having it be a true public benefit?
Are you speaking specifically to co-living or to some of the other housing types as well?
Co-living, yes. Thank you.
Councillor, this is Oliver. I don't know how we can really address that type of concern. I think the provision is to create the opportunity to allow this type of units to be built. That's the opportunity that we are trying to create and where they will be allowed. Other than that, there's a definition of what co-living is or co-housing, and we are adding that definition in our code as is required now through the bill the legislature passed. This is just creating opportunity. I don't know how many of this will come online, but at least identifying through our Title 40 that this type of housing opportunities now allow in various zoning districts. That is our obligation, Councillor.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think you're right. We don't know. Maybe the market doesn't even build any of this, but I think we should keep a very close eye on this to see what is eventually developing, and just kind of really keeping an eye on the quality of life that it is providing for folks. And if adjustments need to be made, then let's look at making them as we move down the road.
Amber, you had a comment.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Amber Smith, Chief Civil Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. I think, Councillor Young, to get to some of your concerns that are legitimate and real ones, I think that beyond kind of the development code and the things that we're considering here in the comprehensive plan, there are regulations in other areas of law with respect to occupancy and also health and safety standards that are regulated at both the state and the local level with respect to that, that I think address some of the concerns that you have that we see now more so in our current housing situations than maybe we did, decades past, where these co-living type places or, boarding houses maybe didn't have the same type of regulations. But under the Washington State Landlord Tenant Act laws, there are lots of availabilities to ensure that individuals are made safe. There's housing code and occupancy regulations that exist out there, and even at the local level, if there's a habitability issue with respect to health and safety in a landlord-tenant situation, I know that there is statutes directly on point that allows the county in certain offices and departments with respect to what those health and safety regulations could be, that we go in and do inspections. And that there's some tight timelines with respect to that. So I think those concerns are addressed, not necessarily in the comprehensive plan, but in other areas of regulation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Chair, and I think that most of us that have been renters know that there is a limit as to how many people can live in a specific unit depending on size. But I want to mention that something that Councillor Young mentioned was that this type of housing would appeal to young people or college students. I would argue maybe not necessarily appeal to senior citizens who aren't on a fixed income, but it would benefit them. It would benefit people that are earning minimum wage and don't want to have to work 3 jobs in order to be able to rent a 1-bedroom apartment. It would benefit people that don't need a lot of space, right? Again, fixed income, senior citizens, low income individuals. And I think they would prefer this over living in the streets, right? We know the stats. Senior citizens, young people are at a higher risk of losing their home, being pushed out as a result of high rents that over the last year and a half that I've been on this council have increased on average $200 in our county alone. Housing has gone from $535K to now $570 according to the Columbian. So that is significant. It is pushing a lot of people away, or people have to take on several jobs. So I would argue again that I think there is a need for this. I don't know how much this appeals to developers and that they're willing to build this, but there's absolutely need for this type of housing for all types of income or, well, low income individuals and all types of demographics.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I would agree with that. Maybe I should just refine my comments a little bit to say it's not that I am opposed to this in any way. It's just that I want to make sure that the people that are moving here are the ones that it satisfies their needs. Not people having to move here and it doesn't satisfy their needs because it's the only thing that they can afford. I mean, it illustrates the whole entire affordability problem in general. We need to make sure, do our very best to provide affordable housing for everybody that fits, that suits and serves the needs that they have.
Okay, I would just like to let everyone know we have 10 more pages of the presentation and about 30 minutes before we come up to our lunch break. So let's continue.
I only have one more slide for you. So if we would please. Okay, two, but one more topic. Last topic here is just, as we've already mentioned, coming back to some of these residential codes. Well, we are taking this opportunity to go back to some of those 2024 code updates, a few refinements proposed for the low density zones. One was just carrying over the same philosophy about minimum densities for these R1 zones, making sure we didn't adjust those with the previous updates. We only adjust the maximum densities. And so we wanted to come back and revise the minimum densities in those zones to be better in line with that. We also had a minor clarification about some overlapping standards for the compact lots and narrow lot development standards. And then also clarification that's already been updated, was really my oversight in the 2024 updates to make sure that townhouses are permitted outright in those zones, that the cap that's in the code is only it's 4 units per structure that's permitted outright, not 4 total per development. So you can have as many 4-unit townhouses as you want proposed in a development. So, and that's already been adopted. So last piece is just to continue to the extent you have time for more questions and discussions today. And I'll just give you a preview of next steps. This is continuing in step with the comprehensive plan update. So you'll see a revised code draft that's refined based on this in a work session with Planning Commission in August, as well as public comments. We'll take those into account, move that forward as part of the adoption process this fall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes.
I didn't hear you mention our previous discussion about having rural detached ADUs. And I was just curious if all of these changes, do those satisfy our housing requirements under the comp plan? Is that sufficient, or and does that incorporate what we were discussing with that proposed change? I'm just curious if we need it. I know when we discuss it, my biggest concern was trying to minimize the footprint of another potential dwelling on like a 5-acre rural zone, and I was just curious if that was incorporated in these estimates.
Thank you, Councilor Little. I believe that no, the direction of council, if I recall, was to work on that post-plan adoption and put it in phase 3. That was my recollection of the direction from council.
Okay, great. Does that then imply that for our requirements to provide certain types of housing and certain numbers of housing, these steps will make us compliant?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
When does phase 3 occur?
Excuse me?
When does phase 3 occur? When will we be working on phase 3?
I think that's
After the adoption of the comprehensive plan.
Okay, so immediately after.
Immediately after, and because it's Title 40, we can do that at any time.
Okay, thank you.
Chair,
Yes.
just question real quick. I'm wondering if now is the appropriate time to ask this question, or if we have more presentation where it would be more fitting. But I would like to eventually talk about ownership and some of the concerns that I've been hearing from members of DEEB about townhouses being allowed or not allowed. Is that now? Should we discuss that, or is that later?
So I think you're referring to in the existing urban medium density zone, we allow for townhouses and more ownership opportunities, correct? And
Yes.
what we're proposing would not allow that.
Correct.
And that's getting to Councilor Little's point, how we're going to be able to achieve the requirements that are laid out in the GMA to meet those income band targets.
So is that later, or
But
do
you
we
can-
discuss that now?
You can bring it up now.
Okay, well, I will do that. I have some concerns with this. You know, I've mentioned all along during the comprehensive plan update that we are not studying and analyzing the impacts to home ownership nearly enough. And I have a lot of concern with us, you know, making many of the changes that we're making. I think it is leading towards more barriers and restrictions in the ability to own your home. And home ownership goes way beyond just owning a home. It creates a whole level of stability and predictability. Your payment stays the same. It shields you from the affordable housing crisis that we're experiencing. You know, it creates more communities and stability in community because you live at a place longer. And the biggest thing is that you're the one that's able to choose if you move or not, rather than somebody else. So with that being said, I have major concerns if we are, you know, changing code that does not allow any ownership availability. So when we're taking away the ability to have townhomes, I really want to fundamentally understand the reasoning for that. And, you know, whether from what I've heard, you know, there's significant discussion on this during HOSAP, and then we did not adopt a lot of the policy that was recommended. So can you touch on that?
Certainly. So as we discussed earlier, the changes that we made to the low density residential zones in the first adoption of the HOSAP, which expanded the opportunities for cottage housing, increasing densities in the urban low zones, going from 8 units an acre to 21 units an acre, essentially tripled our capacity for those types of ownership opportunities in those zones. So what we're doing, because we've increased that capacity, we're replacing that with what we're taking away from the urban medium, which is a very much smaller fractional land base. And that's the only land base we have that would allow us to meet these income band targets, is the multifamily zones. So that's really kind of what we're doing. We've expanded what you can do in the low density zone. And then because of these requirements, this was really the only opportunity to get at that. I don't know where else you would build that affordable housing other than in those multifamily zones. That was the original intent of that. And I think we've strayed away from that over the years. And now that we are circling back and allowing for middle housing in those zones, that creates more ownership opportunities for that type of housing.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, then we've made the decision in multifamily zones not to allow any ownership opportunities just for the sake of saying that we think that the apartments will be affordable or theoretically could be affordable. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, that's the approach that we're taking to try to meet that. You've seen the data that we've gotten where half of the developments in these lower density urban medium zones are being consumed by the same types of projects that are now allowed in the urban low density zones. And so we're just shifting from one to the other to create space for more of the multifamily that we desperately need.
Okay, yeah, I don't disagree that we need multifamily, but what I'm failing to understand is if townhomes can create the same level of density as apartments, I fundamentally don't understand why we wouldn't allow that, because the reality is brand new apartments are not going to be affordable anyway.
They're going to be more affordable than brand new housing.
Maybe on the short term, but ultimately long term, when you buy a house, you're going to have affordability because your payment doesn't increase while rent goes up. So it's a temporary thing. I just fundamentally disagree with that. I think we need to create housing stock of all different types, and that, you know, reducing pressure overall on and having a shortage of housing is what's going to lead to longer term affordability. But I don't fundamentally agree with that. I think that if you can provide the level of density in a home ownership opportunity, I think that should be allowed.
I think that's the question, whether or not you're able to achieve that.
I don't, well, the density,
Density is not the question. Here's what we are trying to accomplish. Currently, in our multi-family zone, which we have very limited in terms of available area designated as multi-family or urban medium, we are currently allowing single-family detached in that district. What we are proposing is that because the bill that the legislature passed, when the legislature passed that bill, the concern was that is really making single family no longer allowed. And our reasoning is no. In the single family zone, what we have been doing locally through zoning is exclusively only allowing single family zone in the single family zone or district. The legislature have said, no, open up that single family zone and allow for various type of housing type: duplex, triplex, fourplex, townhouses, cottage housing, and other type of housing. That's what we have done. Because the council have done so, and because we took the effort to develop the housing action plan, now it makes no, in my opinion, and I believe that, it makes no sense to also continue to allow those type of housing type in your multi-family zone, because it is your multi-family zone that will get you to meeting that 80 plus AMI apartments. Now, Councillor Little, and not Councillor Little, Councillor Young, on a home ownership, nothing in this proposed zoning have taken housing ownership off the table. Nothing. There are a variety of reasons for home ownership. If you can afford it based on your income, based on other varieties or issues, your ability to pay, if you will, your credit score, interest rate, so forth. It doesn't imply that those that live in multi-family will not one day have the opportunity to move out of the apartment and go into a single family home. You know, the goal is to provide housing for your population that you're planning for. That is the goal. In addition to that, home ownership is also a goal that you want to provide opportunity to occur in your community. But like I said, nothing that we are proposing takes home ownership or ability to own a home away. Nothing. We
Well,
don't know
I mean,
yet.
if you can't
w-
build
we don't know,
townhomes,
Councillor, we don't know what the medium housing price in the future will be. The other factors that will contribute to that, but nothing here that we are proposing takes away home ownership. I believe that it's a policy call, and it makes sense to say that if you have a very limited area designated for multifamily, you have to make it strictly multifamily. That's just the call. If I can recall going back to many years ago, we were having the same issue, and I can remember, go back to the tapes. We made a point to the councillors or commissioners at the time, you're creating a problem, because the county didn't used to allow single detached housing in the multifamily zone. And we made that case that it's going to be difficult to say no when time comes. And here we are. You've already allowed it in the single family zone. You've opened the field wide open. Why not you? And then you're getting up to 21 point, staff said 21 units. It's actually 21.7 dwelling unit now because of the various housing type you allowed in the single family zone. So why leave R18, R12 much lower than what you see in the other zone based on the changes that the council made? So I will stop there, but I think it makes sense to make single, multi-family and urban medium strictly for those. But you don't have, where will you zone apartments zoning? Not at the periphery. If you were to expand the urban growth boundary, for example, it's not at the periphery of your rural area that you will build apartments. No, we need those lands strictly to be for apartments.
so the way I view this is we have density goals, we have housing goals. And I think that if we are still achieving that same level of density of units that we need, that let the market decide where the need is greatest. If the need is greatest with apartments, that's what it will build. If it's greatest for ownership, then that's what it will build. But again, if you're able, and I'm not suggesting that we lower our zoning density minimums, what I'm suggesting is that if ownership product can be built and still achieve that level of density, I don't think we should be restricting that. I mean, we're not going to end up in a situation where all of a sudden all apartment building is going to stop and they're going to build only townhouses. That's not going to happen, but let the market balance itself out according to need. But if you restrict it and say this can't be built here, then you could potentially end up with an unbalanced system.
Okay, we have a couple of comments from our panel, and then I think we have to move on. We're not going to resolve this today.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think we've had density targets for since the GMA has been in existence since 1994. What's new is the state's requiring us to plan for at different income band levels. And that's what's, you can achieve the same density depending on the product, but if it's not affordable at that income range, then you're not meeting the objective. And that's really the bottom line. If we want to allow for townhomes and it's going to be conditional on it being 50 to 80% of AMI and the development community agrees to it, you can provide that as an option. But otherwise, if you don't have that connection to the income, you're not, just by achieving density doesn't get you there.
Right. Oliver,
Well,
did you
we're
want to
not
add
gonna
something?
achieve that
Excuse
either
me.
with
I think
new apartments.
Oliver.
No,
Oliver wanted to add
I agree
something.
with my staff. There is no way, Councillor Young, you're going to get the density. This goal is not about increasing density. It is a balancing act, and we have provided for a variety of density options, and in addition, a variety of housing types, so you're not going to get the same density if you're building single detached housing in the multi-family zone. You're not going to.
Okay, I think we need to move on so we can wrap this work session up before noon. Okay, thank you for that discussion. Please continue.
Councillors, I think we'll go to these changes we are proposing in the transportation Title 40, and Jose will discuss this with council, and then we'll wrap. If we have time, we'll go to the procedural chapter. Jose, go ahead with the transportation.
Okay, so very quickly, there's 6 sections of the impact fee code that we're proposing amendments to. Most of that is related to referencing. I think we have an appendix that we reference, and we're proposing to change that just to the capital facilities plan. There's the annual adjustment of impact fee rates is to account for an inflation index that is done automatically. And it has a cap of 3 years of increases before it comes back to council. So these would be automated on an annual basis. As an example, since we've started the comprehensive plan update process, we have not updated any of the fee rates based on inflation because of the comp plan not being able to make changes at the same time we're updating the plan. We're also making a change to the impact fee duration, just to be clear that just when the project is completed doesn't necessarily mean the impact fee rates go away. It's based on the private share that's assumed, and until we get to achieve that payback, the impact fees will be in place. And then there's a clarification on the impact fee credit, that the entirety of the project has to be done in order to get credit. I think in some situations we're getting road modifications where you're looking at reducing or removing part of maybe a frontage improvement, and it just doesn't make sense for us to give an impact fee credit to the whole road if part of it isn't being developed. And based on what we've shared with you in the last couple of weeks about our need for sidewalks and the deficit that we have in that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to provide a credit if the entirety of the road's not being built, as an example. So that's the summary of those transportation impact fees. If you have any questions.
Councillors, I know this is Oliver again. I know we're approaching almost noon hour. We have one more chapter. And I see Susan is coming. Susan, help us summarize what is in the procedural chapter. This is the chapter, if I may quickly, that provides opportunity for property owners to make an application for plan amendment and zone change, and is required by law. And if I may quickly, the legislature added other things we have to do, so we are complying.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Susan Ellinger. I'm with Community Planning. And as with all of the chapters, the procedural guidelines section was primarily reviewed based on the Commerce Checklist for the 4 issues that are shown on the slide. In this chapter, there were several changes related to new legislation. One example of that is updating the periodic review timeframe from 8 years to 10 years. Modified language has also been included in this chapter regarding urban growth areas, or UGAs, reductions and swaps. A UGA swap is exactly what it sounds like. It's just removing one area from the UGA and adding another area. The existing chapter does not specifically address reductions and swaps, so new language was added to address these types of proposals, along with references to the criteria in the state legislation. There was also no language in the existing chapter that was identified. I'm sorry, there was also language in the existing chapter that was identified that was not consistent with GMA, so that language was removed. The majority of the edits to this chapter are based on, are proposed for clarity to the following items: the types of amendments that can be requested, the review process for each of those amendments, the criteria for the reviews, and the timing and the parties that can request each type of amendment. As you can see in the proposed modifications, the text has been changed to a series of tables that more clearly outline each of the details for these processes and provide a consistent format. The organization of the new tables is based on the three main processes that we review, that we use to review amendments. And those include as part of the periodic review every 10 years, through the yearly annual review or docket process, and as one of a small number of exceptions that can be reviewed more frequently outside of the periodic review or annual review process. The existing text in the chapter was not organized around these three processes, so the revisions help provide clarity and a link back to the way that we complete these projects. And finally, there was a duplication between the comprehensive plan and the code, especially for the criteria for some of these actions, and that was addressed in the proposed modifications to the comprehensive plan, and we will consider if updates to the code are necessary in the future. That is a very quick summary of the changes in the procedures chapter, and I'm going to pass it back to Jose to finish the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, Council. So this is the litany of appendices and other comp plan sections. As Oliver mentioned earlier, if you have questions about these, please let us know, but we weren't going to spend a whole lot of time going through these in any level of detail. There are some of these are pretty minor. A lot of these are, I think the climate element resource documents contains a lot of information about that process. But yeah, any questions you may have, I think we have staff available. Also, if you have any questions about any of these appendices.
Okay, thank you, Susan and Jose. Councilors will be coming to you July 29th to share with you the impact fees, schools, fire, and if we have TIF, traffic impact fees, we'll provide you that. The school, there are 9 school districts in the county, and they don't always submit their capital facilities plan and the associated impact fee at a go. So we have about, our code requires 4 years, so we staggered it. There are about 5 school districts that submitted their capital facilities plan and their attendant impact fees. We have about 4 fire districts that also submitted their capital facilities plan and associated fire impact fee. The school district and fire district went to the Planning Commission last Thursday. The Planning Commission reviewed that and made a recommendation to council to approve the request with the exception of Woodland School District, which the Planning Commission did not make a recommendation. The motion to approve did not pass. I think it was 4-3, if I'm not mistaken. But we are working with Cindy, who comes here, the court reporter, to prepare the minutes. If the council would like to have any of the planning or the chair of the Planning Commission to appear when you have a hearing, we will make that request. What I would like to ask the council is, and I know the county manager is listening, to see how quickly and I believe Rebecca and Michelle, how quickly we can have a hearing with you, because I don't want to combine this all into one hearing. We will recommend you have a hearing on the school impact fees or the impact fees, because you have to consider each request or each district individually. And because there are about 9 fire, including school and maybe TIF, I would like you to have that hearing maybe September 1 before you take on the hearings on the plan adoption. That will be my ask.
Okay, let's see. I think Labor Day comes late, so September 1 would be a Tuesday. Is that correct? Yes. I think that makes sense. I know it takes some time to go through all of those entities at a public hearing, so I think that would be worthwhile. Other counselors agree?
I agree.
There's a couple of us that agree. What about the rest? Okay, there's all right, great.
Yeah, and
Okay,
I
thanks.
definitely, Chair, if I may, I definitely would like to have somebody from the Planning Commission present to be able to understand better what the conversation was.
I will certainly, this is Oliver, I will certainly ask the chair if he can and let them know that the hearing will be on September 1st. I will also say that representative of the school district will be here. In the past, each of the school superintendent often come. All the fire district chiefs will be here. So they can also share with you what their issues are. They were all present at the Planning Commission. The land use attorney representing all the school district, Ms. Leanne Bremer, will be here. If the council want the superintendents to show up, we will ask through Leanne Bremer, but certainly, I will ask the chair of the Planning Commission, see if he's available. That's Mr. Carl Johnson. So, but you will also get the minutes, and that's all we are doing, transmitting the recommendation of the PC to you. But I will ask.
Right, and if we have time, we can always tune in and watch the Planning Commission's deliberations. Kathleen, do
I
you
just wanted to clarify, Councilor Young, are you just wanting us to make sure that they are available and to provide comment if they so choose? Or are you asking for a separate, like, actual presentation for council?
No, not a separate presentation, just to where they're available and able to speak to us, and we can ask them questions if needed.
Okay, so more than just like a 3-minute public comment is council
Correct.
with?
So not a presentation, but just be available is what I'm hearing. Okay, and we can request that.
Councilors, we are done.
Wow, good. I think we made it right at noon. So thank you very much. Thank you, counselors, for all your deliberations. This is a lot of material to go through, and we know we have a deadline. So we'll reconvene at 1 for council time, and we're adjourned.